What's going on, everybody? It's Moonshine. How you doing? Welcome back to another Moonshine Talking. Hope you're having a good one. So today, on this video, I figured I would dive deep into the world of pro wrestling, some of the current stuff that's out there, and the subject of today is going to be JCW, better known as Juggalo Championship Wrestling. Yes, for those of you that are familiar, that Juggalo. I didn't stutter when I said that. It is Juggalo Championship Wrestling. That is the company that is run by Violent J, and I don't think so much Shaggy Two Dope anymore, but it was founded by the two of them, better known to most as the Insane Clown Posse, who are a hip hop duo. They have they wear clown makeup. They're from uh they're from the Midwest. They're famous for spraying Fago, which is a cheap soda, onto their audience. All their audience dress up like them, wear clown makeup, call themselves juggalos and ninjas and juggalettes or some such crap. They have their mascot, their logo called Hatchet Man, where you see emblazoned on every and anything from medallions to shirts to people's bodies, because people have Hatchet Man tattoos, and it's like it's its whole little universe. They have a thing each year called the Gathering of the Juggalos, where they all get together and do God knows what with God knows who. Usually highlighted or headlined by the ICP performing. But somewhere along the way, as this cult of personality developed, uh, Violent J and Shaggy Two Dope leveraged their celebrity to get into the pro wrestling business. At first, they would do appearances for, I think it was first they were with ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling. I kind of have a feeling based on, I think they're from Michigan, if I'm not mistaken. I think they're from Detroit. And I think having a connection to Rob Van Dam and Sabu, that got them into ECW. And I'm pretty sure back then Van Dam and Sabu beat the crap out of them. Then they wound up in WWF during the Attitude Era, and they worked with the Headbangers, Mosh and Thrasher. They worked with the Oddities, which was Kurgan, who famously had a role in the movie 300 as the big gigantic extra. He's big gigantic dude with a big thick neck. He's a French wrestler, and but he was Kurgan the Giant. There was who were the other oddities besides Tenta? Because they had John Tenta was part of it as Golga, and he wore a mask and a Cartman shirt. Used to come to the ring with a Cartman doll. There's Luna Vachon, who Luna was great. She was second generation wrestler. Her comes from a very famous wrestling family. Butcher Vachon and Mad Dog Vachon were her. One was her dad, the other was her uncle. So very good pedigree as far as the wrestling business goes. Cut her teeth down in Florida with Kevin Sullivan as part of his Army of Darkness. Uh, Went on to become one of the more prolific, I would say, female pro wrestlers. She definitely stood out amongst the pack, especially during a day and age when, in particular, the Attitude Era, where a lot more emphasis was put on looks. And not that she was a horrible looking woman, but she did not fit the traditional, like, bimbo-y kind of look. Like, she didn't look like, and this is not a knock on any of the women I'm about to mention, she didn't look like Trish Stratus or Stacy Keebler or like back then, even Miss Jacqueline. I mean, all these women were unbelievably gorgeous, and for the most part, still are to this day. And Luna didn't look like that. She just had a very different look. She was much more, dare I say, she was more metal looking than any of them. But they were part of that, and then they had wound up in WCW in World Championship Wrestling, and they worked with At first, they were part of something called the Deadpool, I think, and I think they were with, it was Raven and Vampiro. And if you don't know these names, your eyes have already glazed over, then don't worry about it. I'll see you next time if you've logged out already, logged off of this video and closed it. But there was I'm pretty sure it was Vampiro, Raven, and the ICP, and then eventually it was just Vampiro. Excuse me. They had a guy named Dale Torborg who they did a cross promotion thing with Kiss and Gene Simmons where he was kind of like one of these middling acts in the company on the roster, and they stuck him in the demon makeup and made him the Kiss Demon, and he was part of the group. And I think at one point they were feuding with Sting, or Vampiro was feuding with Sting, but that's all just kind of bad. Point being is that the ICP have been in every major professional wrestling company in America in the past couple of decades during a time when, to say that, with the exception of maybe Rick Rude, there's not too many people that can say that they worked for every major wrestling company during the Monday Night Wars, but they can say that, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. And then in '99, they formed their own company, JCW. I have a tape of one of their compilation shows. Actually, I do, but it's actually boxed up right now because I'm getting ready to put a bunch of stuff in storage, and that's I excuse me, I pretty much boxed up all the VHS tapes. But yeah, they formed their own company. It's been getting a lot of buzz as of late because they ended up hiring Vince Russo, who was one of the main writers during the Attitude Era with Vince McMahon and Bruce Pritchard and Jim Cornette and probably Pat Patterson to a certain degree. He was one of the head writers in during the Attitude Era. There's a lot of debate as to whether or not Vince Russo actually was the catalyst for the success that WWE ended up having when they overtook WCW in the ratings war. If you ask him, it was all his doing. If you ask a lot of people, then it was more he had ideas, but they got filtered through Vince McMahon's vision, and those were the ideas that worked the best. If you ask other people like Jim Cornette, everything that he did was dog shit, and he's ruined the business, and he hates him and can't wait for him to die. He's only living, or one of his main reasons for living is so he can outlive Russo and piss on his grave when he's dead. The two just like Cornette does not like Vince Russo, which is that's the moral of that story. But Russo he went to WCW, and the reason a lot of people don't think that he was the creative visionary that he would say that he is because a lot of his ideas there were terrible. He went to another smaller company, TNA, Total Nonstop Action, Impact. He did a bunch of stuff there, and a lot of there's plenty of people that say those are some of the worst years creatively of TNA. When he was in WCW, I famously remember there were lots of this and that on a pole matches and lots of needless nudity, not nudity, but lots of TNA, not TNA like Total Nonstop Action, but just like boobs and butts and stuff like that. Like he was a lot of sex appeal and things of that nature, which is perfectly fine. I'm down with that. I think wrestling needs more of that nowadays. I know that the women's wrestlers want to be treated like equals with the men and as far as in ring work and all that sort of stuff. But at the same time, I kind of wish I harken back to a day when you still got a bikini calendar or bikini video out of the lot. But that's just me. That's me being a chauvinist probably, or a pig or misogynist, whatever. Take your pick. But then he ended up he dipped out of wrestling, wanted nothing to do with it. He's been pretty much he's not been involved in the wrestling business, but he's been commenting on it for years, probably even decades. He's got a podcast. He does He does a show with Al Snow, who's a great mind, got a great mind for the business, longtime veteran. There's another guy, I think is their producer. He does another show with a guy, Jonathan Coachman, who used to work for WWF. And yeah, he decided to throw his hat back into the creative ring, and he hooked up with Violent J. He, from what I gathered, listened to a Ariel Hawani interview that he did. He is doing a 10 episode run with JCW. It's he's treating it as episodic television where there's cliffhangers and there's a story that goes is supposed to go throughout the entire thing, and there's going to be some big payoff. And yeah, I've watched a bunch of episodes. I've never really watched JCW before because back in the day it was just awful garbage, borderline backyard wrestling. And the best part about it was listening to their awful commentary that they would do under their pseudonyms. And that was really, there really wasn't much to it. It was lots of garbage, all their Juggalo people from Psychopathic Records wrestling terribly, working with legends who were well past their prime, and some of them probably shouldn't have even been in the ring. But over time, they would do shows and get lots of good veterans working on the shows and build up a little. They've built up an underground following over as time has gone on. So I watched a bunch of these videos videos on YouTube. They air on Thursdays at 7 p.m. Eastern. So I've been watching them, and I figured I would share my opinion. I asked one dude, Andrew, if he thought it would be a good, because I know he's really into the wrestling stuff. And I figured, you know what? I was at the in the live chat for JCW this past week, and I don't know what his name is, but he's got his handle on YouTube is at EMPEDE 23. So I don't know if that's in MP'd or I don't know how you'd say that, but he was having a blast watching the show. I've seen him in various chats like the Necron and Francisco Juaba, his thing, and a couple other places. I think he's subscribed or he has been subscribed to my channel. It's I don't know if he still is or not. I don't really look as far as that goes, but yeah, it was just cool seeing. You see people sometimes in the various different spots on the internet that it kind of intersects together. But anyhow, that's neither here nor there. I've gone on for geez 12 and a half minutes and said nothing. So let's get into it. So first of all, let's break it down into what I like, what I don't, where I think they could improve, and how do I think they could improve. That's pretty much going to be the parameters of the barometers and parameters. Those are both two different words. You don't have to combine them, Dan. But for starters, what I don't like, it still looks very indie. What I mean by that is it looks very low rent. The first episode that I saw, they had plastic tarped up everywhere. And I saw a lot of people commenting on somebody else's video who was talking about it, and they said, well, that's because ICP were performing after that. And I guess they were at Harpo's in Detroit, which I've heard of Harpo's, mostly because I think Argusland or GBK was supposed to play there, and somebody called in called in a threat of some kind and got the show canceled. And then I hear all the shady dealings with the promoter and all that. But it was a whole big thing because one of those bands was playing there. And the usual suspects had their panties all in a twist about it. But they were at Harpo's apparently. ICP was going to play after the matches. And that's why they had all that up there, because for liability reasons or for cleanup reasons, because they sprayed the Fago on it all over the place. So, in my opinion, first thing you got to do, you're trying to make this, according to Russo, or trying to make it a more professional standout company, trying to grow it past the point of just being this little insular juggalo centric company, which whether or not that's shooter kayfabe, I'm not quite sure. But if that's legitimately what he's trying to do and trying to help out, then get rid of the. It'd be great if I had a whiteboard here, but I don't. But first thing you do, get rid of, if you're not going to don't air those episodes. That would be my first. If anyone wanted my opinion, unsolicited, if they ask my opinion, not me just giving it because I can, because I got a webcam and have an internet connection. Uh, that's what I would say is don't air those. Don't air shows. Let those be like house shows for the local crowd. Don't air them because it looks low rent. It looks gaudy and cheap. If you're actually trying to present something beyond the juggalos, that ain't cutting it, bro. So that would be the first thing that I would get rid of if you're gonna, because they had one not this week, although the crowd there was really good, but they had one last week that filmed in Wisconsin, and that was a great crowd. And they didn't, and even this week they didn't have the plastic tarps and crap all over the place. So you can't just say that, well, every show they do, the ICP perform after it, so that's why it's set up like that. No, it's just don't do that. Excuse me, probably dying. But the other thing I would say is the ring is too small, especially for some of the bigger guys in there. It looks like it's a 16 by 16. It could be an 18 by 18, but some of the guys that are in that ring, they're so big that they make the ring look very small, very indie. It does kind of look like I would guess it's probably a 16 footer just because of how tiny it is. And those 16 footers, they're rough to navigate because if at any given time you've had the opportunity to work in a WWE ring, WWE rings are 20 footers and they're a step up from the standard, which is an 18-foot ring. Most independent or smaller companies use an 18-foot square ring. And developing your footwork and your cadence when hitting the ropes is a lot different from working in 18 footers versus a WWF ring, which is a 20 footer. You really have to change your pacing and get your steps down. It's even worse with a 16-foot ring because once you've done that and then you go back down to a 16-foot ring, it completely throws your rhythm off. And it's just it they look like a 16-foot ring, usually they use those at bar shows. And if you're trying to present yourself as a reputable company, you want to get out of the bar show mentality. It's basically so I would say try to book better arenas if you can and try to get a better looking ring because the one they have it's too small. Plus they're also the crowd is way too close to the ring. There's times where it just again it's too congested. You don't have enough space between the audience and the talent. There should be some degree of separation between them. So for safety reasons, if nothing else, safety for the wrestlers in case some fan wants to get a little froggy. There's a little more room for them to work around that or deal with that. Plus, when they're doing stuff on the outside of the ring, I watched one of the guys. He did a he got clotheslined backwards over the top rope, and you could hear him hit his knees or his shins or something on the ring. And a lot of that's because he's got nowhere to go. It's either do that or hit your legs on the friggin' guardrails that are 3 inches away from the ring. So that's another thing that I would get rid of. It's like to me, you want a professional setup. The best thing to do is if you cannot at the very least have a good three sides of the ring to where you can have people everywhere and there's not enough space to give at least like a 4 foot gap at the very least between the ring and the railing and the audience, then it's too small of a building, and that's just my opinion. I also they have a ramp. They used a ramp that looks like they pulled it off the back of a U-Haul truck. That's ghetto as hell, and I know that's part of the appeal of JCW. I know that they don't care about that, but again, you're trying to present a more upscale product, that ain't cutting it. Especially because that ramp I watched, it was so close to the ring when they had it set up. Someone's going to get hurt landing on that thing. And some of these indie guys are sloppy at best. At worst, they're untrained and they do stupid shit. And that's the sort of thing where people are going to get hurt doing stuff on it because they're not going to have the sense or just I don't want to say talent because that's a bit too hyperbolic. but they don't have the sense to not. Some of them don't have the sense to not do stuff on a ramp like that. Oh yeah, let's do that. And I can just picture the worst things in the world happening. And I try not to be that guy where, oh, catastrophizing everything. But that's just kind of that I just see nothing good coming of using what looks exactly like a U-Haul ramp to use as the walkway from the back area to the ring. Give me 1 second. I'm going to go grab some water and I will be right back. And we're back. More bad. Uh, too much Russo. As far as the main central storyline of this run that Russo is writing, it's basically he comes in as an investor. He he stages a hostile takeover of JCW from Violent J. This past episode, they basically did a thing where there was a match where two guys were chosen to compete in a match. The winner, the stakes of the match were if Jay's guy won, Jay got to run the company again because the previous episode, Vince does the big reveal that oh he's got controlling interest in the company, so he fires Jay. He's no longer the head creative guy in the company. So this was a match to either give him his position back or kick him out of the company completely. So that was kind of where they went with that. And it's basically it's a lot of the same stuff that I think has bored people to tears since the Attitude Era, where it was good when Vince and Austin were doing it, when it was the anti-authority guy fighting the boss. You know, that was cool, but then they rode it till the brakes came off. And it just got boring, and where it was like 2 decades of okay, here comes the authority figure. The authority figure is going to be out here for 10, 15 minutes bloviating about whatever person or whatever thing that whatever under their thumb authority that they're abusing and that sort of thing. And that's kind of what he's doing. And it just it's like it's already run its course. So I would say that to me at least that's not the greatest thing to do. It's not the best idea, but at the same time, I know some people say, well, he doesn't really have really great ideas to begin with, so he goes with what he knows, and what he knows is they did like 10, 15 years of the person being in charge, and who's in charge? I'm in charge. So I'll be on TV starting the show doing 10-minute promos and doing this like soap opera type stuff, all these monologues and so on and so forth. And on top of that, he's compared to a lot of the wrestlers, Vince Russo is a deceptively tall person. So he's a lot bigger than a lot of the guys, which always looks good when you're trying to present pro wrestlers as larger than life. And the guy who writes the show is bigger than most of the people on the card. Not that he's tougher, but at the same time, it's just that it's that perception versus reality kind of thing where when he's like a foot taller than half the guys there, it kind of makes it look like it's a bunch of children playing in a sandbox. And then on top of that, there's no payoff. You got Vince Russo's in his 60s. Violent J is however old he is, but he's had AFib issues. So where's the payoff? You can't have these two fight. So where do we get a payoff of the two of them fight? It's kind of like when you get the women involved in the guys stuff. You can't beat her up, you can't make her bleed. So where's the payoff? It's just basically this person gets to run roughshod, and there's no real comeuppance that anybody can see and feel and hope for because it's just not going to happen. So that's another con to the programming that I see so far. But again, just my opinion. So now go to the good. I'll go to some of the good. Vito, if you don't know who Vito is, Big Vito LaGrasso, Skull Von Crush, longtime veteran pro wrestler. He's been around for forever. He wrestled on the Northeast Indies for a long time. He's trained by Johnny Rods. He's a fantastic wrestler, very talented shooter. He's a legit badass dude. Can hold his own. His biggest role is he was in WWF or WWE, and they had him wearing a dress, and his whole thing was he's the toughest guy to wear a dress or something like that. He was also in Playgirl at one point when he was doing that whole gimmick, but he's wrestled in ECW as part of the Baldies. He was in WCW as one of the Mama Lukes with Johnny Stamboli and one of my fellow Malenko guys, Tony Mamaluke. I forget, Tony Marinere is what they called him in WCW when he was there for a week, and then he went to ECW and became Tony Mamaluke, and that's the name that stuck with him, and he used all the way to WWE. And but he's a very knowledgeable. He wrestled in Florida for a while. Actually, I did a 6-man with him at one point, and he was very helpful in that match. He was very gracious and sharing some of his knowledge with us. Some of the guys around here didn't like him because he used to come by the school. And I guess one day a couple of the guys who were veteran guys, but they weren't veterans by his standards, they did something wrong in the ring, and he just pulled everybody aside and gave them a browbeating. And basically he was asking everybody how many years they worked, and some of the guys would tell him like, oh, I've been wrestling 10 years, and in his mind 10 years means you're wrestling like 200 300 days out of the year. And a lot of these guys didn't have nearly the amount of matches. They were proportionate with saying that they'd been in the business that many years. That's why nowadays it's much better that you tell people how many matches you've had versus how many years you've been in the business, because you could be in the business for, up until the point that I got hurt. You could say I was in the business for 13, 15 years, and I didn't nearly have the amount of matches that somebody who would be a 15-year veteran could say back in like Vito's day or the old timers day, the legends day, guys from the 70s and 80s and the 90s, they were running hard all the time versus us indie schlubs who are maybe getting once a month gigs. So yeah, there's that. But Vito, he's a great talker. He's good with some of the comedic stuff that they have him doing on occasion. He's good as that enforcer type guy. So he's a plus as far as being on the show. I think he does great work, and he's definitely somebody who would be helpful to be there. Next up, as far as some of the talent there that I do enjoy, there's a few people there who I like, but I'd like to see more of. I'd like to see, this was always supposed to be one of Russo's big things, is that he always had something for everybody. But so far, all I've seen is them just doing this one central storyline, and everything else is kind of half-assed splintering off of it, but not really. There's a couple of guys who are getting involved in it, getting sprinkled in here or there, but by and large, it seems for the most part, everybody is directionless. And it's all just doing match after match after match with the same interchangeable 5 or 6 guys. So it'd be nice to see some of them get their personalities fleshed out, maybe get some mic time. You start to learn about them. Because most people who are going to be watching JCW now, they're not watching it because they're juggalos. They're watching because Vince Russo's involved. They know the name. They know the controversy surrounding him. They know his resume, and they'd like to see what he's going to do. So you work with what you got there. And there's some guys there who I think in ring they're good enough that let's see how they do. Let's see if they have personalities that can translate and maybe resonate with people. So some of those people, Shane Mercer, he's a guy who I've seen before. Powerful guy, very athletic, very agile. He works a lot of deathmatch stuff, I've noticed. A lot of these people all work for another company called JCW, Game Changer Wrestling, which is Joey Janela's company. I've I have mixed feelings on that company. I feel like they seem to court a lot more controversy than they need to, which in a lot of ways means they're probably not as good for the business as they'd like to think they are. That's just my opinion. but they do a lot of stuff that creates buzz, but it's usually not for the best reasons. So that's just my opinion. But a lot of times they have the J and GCW seem to have a lot of intersectional talent. They seem to a lot of overlapping talent between the two companies. But he works for them. Uh, so yeah, I'd like to see more personality out of him. There's a female wrestler called uh, Alice Crowley, who I'd like to see more out of her. She looks like she's in good shape, got halfway decent work, has a clothesline finish that looks really good. Let's see more personality out of her. They got her right now paired off with one other female talent, and I guess the women's champ there, who her name is Hollywood or Hollywood J or something like Haley J or something like that. And she just talks like a ghetto trash queen, and it's kind of annoying to hear. It's like a white girl at the club gimmick who talks in black slang and acts like way too much of a trash bag human. So I don't know if that's her gimmick, but it's definitely annoying. So I guess in some ways it's working, but she was talking on the most recent episode, and I was getting ready to hit the mute button. But yeah, I'd like to see more of her. See who else. They're tag champs, the Brothers of Funstruction. They're interesting. I'd like to see more of them. They're actual like rodeo clowns is how they're dressed up. And from what I've heard from a couple people, they have a good gimmick and they know how to work the gimmick with good psychology. I'd like to see more of them because I haven't really seen much of them. They've been in four-way scrambles and six-man tags. I haven't really seen a proper tag match out of them because a lot of the matches now it's all short matches to service all of the backstage gaga, which is Russo's bread and butter, which depending on who you ask, I think there's a happy medium and I don't think he quite meets it, but we'll see how these things go. But at the end of the day, wrestling, regardless of what anybody says, eventually you got to get it in the ring. Pro wrestling is not pro wrestling if there's not stuff happening in the ring. There's not in ring action. And if you can't do it in the ring, then everything you're doing's for naught. You might as well go do dinner theater or Shakespeare in the Park because all of the drama and gaga and pomp and circumstance doesn't matter if you can't get it done in the ring and you can't make people care that way. So that's again just the opinion of some nobody who never made it anywhere, but that's just my opinion. So who else? Who else? There's the zombies. They're called the Outbreak, and they got a guy who's called Barnabas and Bailey or something like that. He looks like a knockoff Sinister Minister, James Mitchell. And I'm still on the fence about them. It's a silly gimmick. If you were to like, I don't get the zombie thing. So they bite people, so people should become zombies based on zombie lore. So how does that work? They don't go out there and just tear people apart and rip their flesh and that sort of thing. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but for the most part, they're they're not. I'm kind of on they're kind of somewhere in the middle of between. I can't decide whether or not it's too hokey or there's promise there. So that's why I'd like to see more of them. There's a guy named Mecha Wolf. He's pretty cool. I like his gimmick. He's kind of like he's a Mexican wrestler, but he's got like a heavy metal gimmick. He's paired up with Vampiro to some degree, or he's one of his acolytes. But I like him because I saw him recently. He wears these like gimmicks, like Roman gladiator skirt gimmicks, and he had a Danzig skull on there. So I was like, oh, he's pretty cool. So I'd like to see more of him just by virtue of that. There's a couple of guys who I've seen enough over the years where it doesn't really like nothing against Matt Cross, but I think I've pretty much he's been in so many of the major indie companies over the past couple of decades. It's like, okay, yay, Matt Cross is there. Okay. Nothing against him, but it's just he's there. He's just another guy that's there. He's very talented, but at the same time, he's just a guy who's always there, it seems. Uh there's a guy named Ninja Mac. I'm not really a fan of his work. It's too indie for me. First time I watched him, he was out on the floor working with somebody, and he did a move where he was basically doing like 6 backflips. And he's kind of a doughy fella, but he's agile. And that's great that he can do all that stuff. But to me, watching somebody do 500 backflips and cartwheels to kick somebody, and the guy has to just stand there or run away from it. And then finally, he's got to stop at some point so the guy can hit the move or before he gets tired. It's like, well, why don't you just let him do 500 backflips and cartwheels and let him tire himself out and then just kick him in the face? You know, that seems to be the fastest point, but the fastest way between 2 points would be to let him tire himself out doing all that nonsense, and then just kick him in the head. That's just my opinion, but yeah, it's stuff like that. It's too. There's too much that has to go into the move to make it happen and make it look good, or make it look, or at least make. It's just that's what it just it takes. There's too much coordinated, pre-organized effort that has to go into it to make the move happen. And if you have to do that much to have your moves come off as looking kind of realistic, and realistic in the sense of this might happen in a movie, but not real life. It wouldn't happen in a real fight. You wouldn't do 500 backflips to kick somebody in a real fight. The person would just look at you like you're an idiot and probably smash you with a pool cue or wait for you to tire yourself out and then kick you in the face. So, not really a fan of his. And then there's these 2 kids. One's name is Jordan Oliver, who I've actually heard of before. Fun fact: he's actually he. I looked on Wikipedia, and he's or not him, his partner. There's Jordan Oliver and Alex Price, and someone referred to them as Pinky in the Brain because one says he's a genius, the other says he's insane. The Pinky in the Brain, brain. But Alec Price is trained by a guy that I know named Bo Douglas. I actually used to work with Bo in NWA New England. We teamed up once. He's cool. He was a cool guy. I met him again in OVW when I was there, and yeah, he was for the OVW. I did an OVW seminar. I wasn't actually in OVW. Just to clear that up for people who have not heard my story before. But they're good. They're good. I enjoy them. I was gonna say they're cool, but they're good. They have really good in ring psychology. They're a solid tag team. A little undersized, but by and large, I've liked both matches that I've seen them in. I'd like to see a little bit more of them because I think that they're a solid all around tag team. And I'm a big fan of tag team wrestling. Loved doing that more than anything else when I wrestled. So huge fan of it, huge fan of seeing people doing it the right way. So I'd like to see more of those guys. But I had to add this one afterwards because I forgot about it. And how could I forget about it? Another wrestler who I think that maybe JCW should steer clear of, actually 2 of them are probably 2 of their most popular people, which means they're going to ignore me, even if I'm going to get ignored anyway, let's be honest. But if anyone does happen to see this who's involved with JCW and they see this, they're going to ignore me because these are 2 of their most popular people with their crowd and their company. But I do not know who made Stephen Flow a thing. And then they get another guy there who's called Cocaine, Cokane. He's a ripoff of Kane, but he pulls out powder and goes nuts, and he he's called Cocaine. Get it? The first time I watched him on the screen, it was him interacting with Vito, and they must have done 1,001 bad cocaine jokes like, oh, Vito's looking for cocaine. Vito's found cocaine, and or Vito's with cocaine in the bathroom, and all these just dumb drug innuendo puns that were even making someone like myself nauseous. And I love bad jokes, but and then Stephen Flo, they're both somewhat talented in the ring. They're athletic to a degree. I mean, they've obviously been trained a little bit, but he should never be the focal point of any show whatsoever until somebody takes him to a dentist and gets his teeth fixed, because He's got the worst case of summer teeth I've ever seen. If you don't know what summer teeth are, talking about bad dad jokes or bad jokes in general. Some are there, some are here, some are yellow, some are brown, some are gone, some are rotten. He's got a horrible mouth. It's a shame. I understand sometimes people can't take care of their choppers, but at the same time, this is a cosmetic business. You're on television, or at least the internet. Go get your teeth fixed. If nothing else, go get a job that's got dental insurance and go get your teeth fixed. If not, Violent J, ICP, some of you people, go get the guy's teeth fixed. I mean, come on now. But yeah, they're just two guys who I don't know. I don't really see long term outside of the memes. And it's the Stephen Flow gimmick. It's basically he's a grunge guy, so get it. It's Stephen Flow. And he's got a whole dumb song that people have latched onto on Instagram and TikTok. Even people who I know who are normie type people who don't follow wrestling, they know who Stephen Flow is. So it makes me, these are the situations which make me think that the internet was a mistake. And yeah, so that's just my opinion on that one. All right, back to the that's my thoughts on that. Back to the original programming. But yeah, and that's that. And then as far as anybody out there who I would like to see JCW reach out to and try to bring in, because some of the talent there's some people there who I just, I could take or leave. I know some of them are parts of the fabric of the company, but they got this real big giant guy who's very unagile called Mr. Happy. I could take or leave him. There's another guy, Willie Mack. He's cool. Uh, James Storm, definitely he needs to be there because he's a veteran with veteran experience. He's good for that. Help teach the younger guys. They got Ricky Morton's kid, Kerry Morton's there. He does all right. I don't know. We'll see where he goes, but he seems to be one of the focal points of the company. But there's a few people there who I would take or leave. They could probably get rid of, and the company itself would be a little bit better off for not having some of those people around, would be my opinion. But some of the people who I would like to see them bring in, I'd like to see them bring in Crowbar. I looked up to see all the indie guys that are out there. Crowbar, Devin Storm, he's a fantastic veteran wrestler, very knowledgeable. He would be an asset to that company. I think he would fit in with that crowd and larger crowds in particular. I don't know how hard he goes nowadays as far as his in-ring work, but when he was doing it a few years ago, he's still excellent. So I'd like to see what he could bring to the table. There's a guy from OVW named Jack Vaughn. He does a lot of like TikTok videos and Instagram videos where he does this seasoned veteran, this grizzled veteran gimmick, and sometimes it's pretty funny. But I'd like to see him in there. He'd be kind of interesting to see in a JCW ring and with their crowds and trying to find a role for him that would make sense. There's three guys who I think would be interesting. I would bring Alex Hammerstone, Richard Holiday, and Jesse Goddard, also from OVW. I'd bring all three of them in because they're big, jacked up body guys, and I would call them Team HGH and just run with the body gimmick. And I think that would kick ass. And aside from them being jacked up dudes, they're all pretty talented guys, good talkers in their own right. But I think that would be a nice wrinkle to add to the JCW roster and see where you could go with them. And then my buddy Brian Brock, I always put him over. He needs to be more places, but he's in a six-man group himself in a trio called the Regulators here in Florida with his partner Jackson Slade and Devin Diaz. I'd like to see them get a shot there. I think they bring that old school Southern flavor, which could either work with Kerry Morton's character or it could work against it as far as a foil to his stuff. And maybe you get some good old school Southern style wrestling going there. Some good old mid South or world class style stuff. So anyhow, so that's my thoughts on JCW. I think there's some promise there, but I wouldn't be going over the hype. I wouldn't be standing out in front of the hype train with this just yet. I've watched a couple people talk about it, and they act like this is like the second coming of pro wrestling Jesus. And I'd have to say to that, pump the brakes, slow down, because it's not quite that good. It's not as great as you're making it seem. But then again, as I was watching and listening further, these guys are also juggalos and they have Hatchet Man tattoos, or at least one of them does. So it's like, okay, well, that makes sense. And then also, I would say that I think a lot of the theories they espouse on what would make pro wrestling better, Russo seems to follow them. So of course, he aligns with what they believe is good for wrestling. So of course they think it's the greatest thing they've ever seen. Speaking of, whether this was just part of the show or theory that Russo has in general, he did say something during one of his promos when he was cutting down Violent J about being a wrestler versus a booker and how the two can't coexist. And he mentions Dusty Rhodes and Jeff Jarrett and Triple H. And uh, to me, I would have to say, well, I think first of all, Dusty Rhodes is insane if you don't think that Dusty was a good booker. He had some stinkers of ideas, but at the same time, he had a phenomenal mind for the business and also one of the greatest talkers in the game. You cannot take that away from him. But I think that Fritz von Erich, I think for his time, Vern Gagne, I think Pat Patterson, I think I wrote this down. I think Kevin Sullivan and I think Eddie Graham would all like to have a word with Vince Russo about wrestlers not knowing how to book good wrestling because those are some of the best minds in the game, created some of the most memorable moments in the history of pro wrestling, especially in the golden age era of pro wrestling. So, to that, I would have to say Russo does not know what the hell he's talking about. I mean, even I just that one I didn't get too much. I get that there's a whole thing where let's all just bash Triple H because he's a modern booker. He's the face of WWE, and WWE's not so great right now creatively, or this, that, and the other thing. But to say that is just moronic. So I'm hoping that that was just more like trying to get heat kind of thing. But who knows? He might believe that. But if he does, then I would have to say that this company's doomed because if that's what you believe, then you're a dummy. And you really don't know what you're talking about, which is surprising because you hang out with Al Snow, and Al Snow knows what he's talking about. So I don't know how you could hang out with somebody who's that smart and say something that stupid. But that's just my opinion. So that's what I think. That's my rundown of JCW up until this point. Hope you enjoyed it. Let me know what you think. Everybody, I've babbled on far too long, but take it easy. And I will catch you on the next video. And yeah, go watch JCW. Let me know what you think.